doing stuff like that really fast.
Yeah, it like amps it up.
Yeah, it's
for
the
sure.
same way. Like, it's so funny. Like doing the little introduction at Gather where you go up and just say like,
See, I've never gone together because I like Fridays.
"Oh, right, of course, yes."
But I've heard that it's cool, but like, yeah, I think that would make me nervous too.
It's so funny though. It's just like so every week there's just like one teacher that just comes up and all they say is like, "Good morning, welcome to Gather, welcome to our faculty and our students and our parents and all that." But and you're literally up there for like 20 seconds.
Yeah.
But it's because there's like the microphone and there's like the
So many people, yeah.
It's so funny.
It does.
Totally.
But like one-on-one, or like in my job now, I do a lot more like meeting, and like sitting like in a small conference room, like I can totally. And it gets big. You're right. When it's like bigger, there's technology.
I know. I really think it's that technology piece because like I'm even like really comfortable with public speaking. It's just like I've just got this thing I'm gonna say, but as soon as I have that microphone, it's like now it's official. Like this is now we're actually presenting.
Yeah.
It's such a funny little thing. There are those things that add the extra level of technology.
Yeah, for sure. I was wondering like if it would be a lot of people or like nobody at all.
Yeah. And part of these always is the social part, right? So people are like, oh, cool, you're going to go to that thing at school, and they're like, they don't even know what it is, but they're like, yeah, we'll check, we'll like,
Yeah, that's true.
They're like, there's no cut. I heard every cut.
I know it.
Yeah.
That's the way to bring them in.
Yeah. Is this an hour or 30 minutes? What do you think?
It is scheduled for an hour.
Okay.
We can see
How it goes.
We can see how it goes, and it won't be longer than an hour. If for some reason, like, are you good with a full hour, or is that tight? You can.
So I have a call at 9:30,
Yeah.
which I can probably do from the phone from the car.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I might have
We'll
to
get
leave
you.
a little before.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
You know what? Maybe when we get closer to the end, I'll just say, we're gonna wrap up.
Okay, that's fine.
Does anyone have any last questions for Laura?
Lara like Sarah.
Like
Yes.
Sarah. Okay, good.
You end up
Lara like Sarah.
getting a lot of parent
Okay.
Oh, well, yeah.
Good.
I mean,
And hopefully they'll ask all the middle school.
I feel like I know this.
Well, I actually went home that day.
But, yeah.
And I was like, how do you feel about rigor? Yeah. Wait, what?
Good morning, everyone. We'd like to get started so we can be respectful of your time. So come on in and settle in. Thank you.
And I was like, that's fine. Yeah. Now it doesn't matter. Now it's like all even.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming this first week back to school. And also, I know there's been so much going on in our lives, traveling perhaps over the break and all. And so I really appreciate your coming and being part of this first Family Communication Program series. So as we get started, I just wanted to touch base a little bit on how this particular topic came to be and how this series kind of came to be. What we really wanted to lean into is hearing from you all that you wanted more information about what's going on during your child's school day. And that is in a lot of different forms. It's in forms of behavior, program, other things that happen during the day. So we're going to make sure that we tackle these topics and that we are paying attention to the feedback that you've offered us about what would be really helpful for you going forward. We started these in, there were parent coffees and there were lots and lots of feedback that came our way, and then we talked about topics with the admin team, and so I'm really happy to be presenting this first one, but I also want to put out there that this is not meant to be a one-off. This is the beginning of a dialogue, and if we feel that after today there's more information on this topic or on other related topics that we need to lean into, I really welcome that feedback. My name is Leslie Richardson, and I'm the director of the Preschool through grade 2. If you haven't met me before, I've been here for about 8 years in a variety of different roles. I have a lovely Dream Team panel up here with me, so I'm going to ask them just to introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about their connection to the PBS community. Maybe we'll start, Annette, down on the end there?
Sure.
Yeah.
My name is Annette Chan, and I have 3 kids at the school. So I have a kindergartner, Samantha, a 2nd grader, Elizabeth, and a 5th grader named Joshua. And we've been here since Joshua was in the ELC, so it's been many years for us.
Hi, I'm Lara Hauser. I have a 3rd grader, Drew, a 5th grader, Sophie, and a 7th grader, Harry, who is at Menlo School. And we also started when Harry was in Room A, formerly known as Room A. So that was that long ago. It was called Room A. That was like 9 or 10 years ago. Yeah. Awesome.
I'm Leah Rice. I'm the learning specialist for K-1-2, so it means I help support the teachers, push into kindergarten, 1st and 2nd.
And I'm Ben Smith. I'm the co-teacher in 4th grade, and this is my 3rd year at the school. I started out in science, and then I really wanted the chance to build strong relationships with my students, so I transitioned over to 4th grade where I got to do that.
Thank you. I also want to let you know that today's session is going to be videotaped. That's why we've got our sound system here and all fancy. And we'll also, any materials that we have here, in addition to some other resources that we're going to be recommended, will all be available electronically afterwards as a follow-up. Feel free, if you're someone who needs to take notes or likes to take notes, do whatever works for you. I know I often take lots of notes and then never look at them, but I feel like it helps me. So do whatever works for you, but please know that, that all of this will be available electronically afterwards, so you don't have to worry about that. I'm really grateful for having the opportunity to start this talk. As we're going to go forward in all of the Family Connection series, one of the things we're going to start off with is touching base with the charter that we did together. So I'm going to go to that. And let me just check and see if my PowerPoint comes live. It's on the way. While that's warming up, the back to school night this year was a little different for all of us. We experienced the creation or the beginning creation of a charter where you wrote down some ideas, some words that you thought represented how you wanted to feel when you were at school. And so we processed those really hundreds and hundreds of words in addition through the parent coffees. And so we ended up with these 3. Your particular word may not be here, but this represents a lot of words here. So let me go. Here we go. Yeah. So one of the things that we do in the classroom that we wanted to replicate with you all as a way that we connect between parents and teachers is knowing how do we want to feel in these interactions and what can we do to make sure that this is part of who we are and how we communicate with one another. So as teachers, as administrators, we want to make sure that we're really checking in and saying, does every interaction with you feel respectful? Am I feeling like I'm respecting you as a parent and your expertise? I also want to feel confident in my abilities to reach out to you, and I want you to feel confident in our program. I want to feel engaged with you, and I also want you to feel like you're engaged with our program. So those are the different ways that these words have kind of come alive. And we're going to just keep touching base on these. I know that when I think about my communications, I know I'm a human being, as we all are, and far from perfect. But I know that these words have begun to really anchor me in a lot of how I think about what you may need from us to help you understand what happens during the school day, and that what we may ask from you in terms of our interactions and communications. So just to anchor that. Any questions on that, comments before we go further? Okay. So for today, I wanted to just share with you how I see this next hour looking. I want to make sure that this hour feels worthwhile for you. So here's what I've got planned, but I'm also very open to making this feel a little bit more interactive, or making sure that we have time set aside for the kinds of issues or questions that might be on your mind. So the goal is really for this to be a forum to exchange information about the PBS program. So we're going to be diving into some content areas shortly. We're going to go through literacy, math, and then EISEL as the three kind of big content areas that I thought we could talk about. That does not mean that we can't bring up other things, but that will just give our talk some structure, so that it's not so open. I also, as we're going through, we're going to talk a little bit about how our philosophy of education, how that guides some of the recommendations that we may make as a school or also individually. We want to make sure that we address questions that are on your mind around the program. And then also we're going to learn a little bit about what else we can do. We want to be receiving and hearing you about what we could do as a school to ease any stress or anxiety that you may be feeling around the program or around what happens during your child's school day. With the key question of how can we partner to support our student progress and growth? And what can we learn from that interaction together, I think is going to be so important going forward. And then before we dive into the content, I just wanted to give you a quick update on some things that are already out there that you may or may not know about, and then other things that are coming soon. And I think that it's just worth getting this out there. That might be the academic section of the PBS website has some information about our philosophy and our approach, and you may have looked at that when you were in the process of applying. It's since been revised and updated, so there are some things there that it's always a great resource if you're looking for information about the program. The classroom blogs, the teachers spend a lot of time working on those, and I know that also is one of those things, a time management issue. You know, can you read all the classroom blogs all the time? Of course not, but there really are great sources of information. And I was going to ask Ben a little bit to talk a little bit about how he's been using the classroom blogs as an example, and then if you have any ideas about how the classroom blogs have been helpful for you, we could talk about that.
Absolutely. So I think one really helpful piece of the classroom blogs is giving parents a preview of some of the work that's going to be coming up, and particularly with math. This can be a helpful tool because we can share some of the strategies that we're teaching in our classrooms now that are probably a little bit different from the way that you guys learned math. So I know with multiplication and division, we really put the emphasis on understanding the whole process rather than the memorization, which is obviously a very different way to look at those things. And so instead of coming home with a multiplication table that our students would be working on, they're coming home and they're drawing squares, or they're drawing arrays, or they're filling out various circles and adding things to them. And it just could look different. So we want to make sure that parents see those strategies beforehand a little bit, so that you guys can help your student work through those strategies the way that we're looking at them in school, so that they're not coming home and it's just a totally mystifying process of like, what are we doing in math right now? We want it to be familiar when they bring it home. So.
Yeah. Is there anything from the classroom blogs that's been a connection point for you with your kids?
Well, I mean, I think for those of us who may not have kids who are super expressive about telling you all of the things that they did during the day, it's a great way to get a window into that. Pro tip, you can subscribe on the website, and you don't have to remember to go back and check. You'll just get an email when the blog is updated, which I found helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
I also appreciated the blog because it's almost like a mini portfolio for my kids. Because I do have some kids that talk a lot and some that don't. But we can pull up that blog together and look at it, and it's a conversation starter. For example, with math, like at first, even when I volunteer, I wasn't really sure and understanding how they're doing math, but I make them the teachers, and they do need to teach me how to do it. And so that's a connection point for our family. You know, now I'm the student. I really need you guys to help me understand this new way of doing math. And there have been times where I'm like, let me show you how I do it, you know? And so I think that that's always been a great way for our family to connect.
Yeah, thank you.
Use it in that way.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that hasn't changed since I was going to school is the conversation at home, either in the car or when you arrive home, and you know, how was your day? Fine. What did you do at school? Nothing. You know, like yeah. So I think there are a lot of ways that we're trying to work around that and partner with you, because it is true that it's hard to wrap up for children to articulate sometimes what they've been doing during the day. So progress reports are coming soon. The teachers spend a lot of time working on these, and I'm really excited for you to be able to see them. One of the things about the progress reports to know is that as you receive them and look at them, there are often multiple data points behind each objective, how each objective is marked on the progress report. And so please feel free to ask your teachers to share with you, if they haven't already, how they arrived at that mark. I mean, there's a lot of thought that goes into them. We host a lot of conversations during our grade team meetings about where someone might fall on the continuum of learning, knowing that there's a very acceptable range within different grade levels. And so that, I hope, will be a really rich conversation for you. And I'm looking forward to that coming a little later this month for you all. And parent-teacher conferences, progress reports will be a big part of that, but also anything else that's on your mind, those are coming up at the end of this month as well. The next item, curriculum guide, we've been talking about this a bit. I think that one of the things that can happen when you're wanting to know how can I help my child at home, how can I optimize the PBS curriculum, is what are they doing during the day? What are the most important things for them to be able to master by the middle of this year, by the end of this year? And I feel like I'd like to own, we haven't been as out there with that information as I think we might need to be. We have it all and we know it all, but it hasn't been out there in a way that I think has been really super visible. So Jordan McCarthy and I spent a couple of days working on this and finalizing it, and it's now just being formatted. And I think it'll be really helpful. It's just an overview of the whole grade span, the arc of the curriculum, what we're really emphasizing, what we'll introduce but we don't expect mastery. And just, I think it'll be a really handy guide for you. So that's coming out a little bit later this month. After this talk, the next point there, recommended resources, we're going to, if you're looking for something to supplement or enhance what's going on during the school day, we're going to recommend some resources for you. I think a point that this team talked about as we were preparing this conversation is that the title of this talk is How to Optimize the PBS Curriculum at Home. There really, as a baseline, is no expectation that you will be needing to supplement the PBS curriculum at home. We do not want you to feel like you need to do that. I know that there's a lot of, sometimes in the void of having enough information, or hearing from perhaps peers or other people's experience, there may be a bit of pressure to do some tutoring, to think I need to do something. And so we just want to put out there that there is not an expectation that that is part of your life. There are times, and this would be an individual case by case, where there may be a targeted need around something, and that's where conversations with your teacher and with Leah or Amy Torrey, her counterpart in the upper grades, would be really helpful. But just to put that out there. Any comments about that? No? Okay. Yes.
Thanks for all this information.
Yes.
Is there any discussion from sort of your standpoint in terms of the classroom blogs about sharing similar types of information on each of the blogs for each of the classes?
Yeah, we've noticed that while there is an expected variation between certain grade levels and what they focus on, of course, but the consistency between the blog information is not there. That's definitely something that we've noticed we'd like to work on. Yeah.
That, everybody's, if there are, for example, I think teachers obviously can focus on whatever they're meant to.
Of course.
But if there are resources that are shared, that, all the classes,
Yeah.
Have a chance to have access.
Yeah. Perfect. That's a great note. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes. Yeah.
Would it be possible to set up a little bit, for those parents who are interested, a little bit more of a focus group interaction on the following? I think Phillips Brooks has this broad development of the child as a whole, and curricular always seem to imply a little bit of a track, and I think there's a little bit of tension between what I think of the vocational, some things you need to know versus the broadband development, right? And by volunteering in class, I find there are interesting variations, and I understand the way you teach math, but I also see some gaps, I think. So maybe having a bit of a discussion, a little more detailed discussion for parents who may want to both share perspectives and learn, and maybe a teacher group might be useful, I think. In fact, I was going to raise this issue with Scott.
Sure. I think after we have this conversation and the resources that come out, and then some of the information that's coming later this month, combined with all progress reports, conferences, and all that, that's going to be a big lot of information. I think that targeted focus groups afterwards would definitely be a possibility. Yeah, sure. Yes, Ashley. Sure, go ahead and ask. Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, it's okay.
At the breakfast table, I was talking about progress reports and
Yeah.
setting our times, and I got the question from both my kindergartner and my fourth grader, do I get to read this? And do I get to see it? And what's your intention? And I guess from the teacher perspective, are they writing it just so the parent can read it? Or
Yeah.
do we really sit down and go
Yeah. I think the intended audience is an adult, a parent. I think that there are definitely ways that you can talk about their strengths and their growth opportunities in a way that is helpful for them. But I think the way that the progress report looks and also the language, I think that a child could see an area of growth and really feel like kind of really bad about it in a way that might be more magnified more than the context that it needs to be in. Do you know what I mean? So really, it's intended for an adult audience. Yeah.
If there was something that, like, let's say behavior you saw or whatever it was,
Yeah.
you could reference though the fact that, this teacher is saying
Yeah.
this. Okay.
Yeah. And I often and handle it in a way that values how your family communication style, of course, and honors that. But I feel like conversations could be, I heard from your teacher that this is going really well for you, that you've really been working hard during writing. Way to go, awesome. Is there anything I can do to support you with that? What's still feeling hard for you? And also, I've heard that maybe there's, I don't know, it can be a social thing, or it could be, I heard that sometimes during these pre-assessments in math, those can feel really hard for you, that kind of thing, So, do you have any ideas on that? Any tips on progress
That's sort of how we've
stuff?
handled it. I've
Yeah.
never shared progress reports from PBS with our kids, like, directly. It's just, as Leslie said, more of a jumping off point for conversations around what's going well, or reinforcing, even sometimes after the fact, when one of them would come home and be like, oh, I'm so bad at math, or like, I hate writing, like those kinds of things. And I can kind of pull back to, but hey, your teacher's telling me this, blah, blah, blah. So that's sort of what has felt more right for our kids, in terms of what they are ready and willing to process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have been at schools and previous places I've worked where the progress report is written to the child, but it's a different kind of progress report. Yeah. So almost like a letter written to the child. Yes.
Sorry, just because I'm here.
Yeah.
Have you had progress reports in the past, or is it something new?
Oh, yeah. We've always had them. They've changed. I mean, they've morphed in different formats in different ways. This last variation, this is the 4th year of this round of progress reports. We used to have a rubric, and now we have something where, and we've sent these out. They're on the website if you want to take a look at the blank form, just to get a sense of that and how they look across the grade spans. But we really value independence and mastery, and so that's part of what we're how we think of how we judge their progress, in terms of that. Sarah, did you have a question? Very little. I mean, they know that you are that they're going to have these special days where they have a half a day of their regular program, and then parents are coming in to talk to the teachers. If your child is someone who tends to worry, you can always say, this is not like, you're not in trouble. This is just a time for me to catch up and see what's happening in the classroom and see some of the work that you've been doing and learn about that. So they know very, very little about that. We do in a developmentally appropriate way, as we're doing any kind of formative assessments, we let the kids know that we're wanting to see how much you've learned about this, so we know how we can better teach you. Do we need a little bit more practice on this, or can we move on? And so they know about that kind of language, but they don't really know about the progress reports as far as, have you had anything come home?
No, and I think I didn't really get questions until they were a little bit older. Mm-hmm. And it was the same thing, like I think in 4th grade, where Joshua came in and was like, oh, do I get to see these progress reports? Because it almost seems like, and I was like, no, that's really for mommy and daddy, but we will bring up, like 5 main points that we get from it. And that's where I'll bring up a story that their teachers talked about, or what they are doing well, or sometimes he wants to know, like, what can I work on? And I'm like, okay, well, here are some things that you can work on. Yeah. But I never really tell them how I just say these are things you can work on. I don't exactly give what that equated to. Right. And so that's worked well for our family, and I know that's all going to change when they move on to that next step. So I feel like keeping that stress level low, and also when they go into because they do assessments in class, and they start to know that, they just look at it like, oh, the teacher's just trying to see what I know, and so that's worked well for us. I don't know if it works well for everybody.
That's very common language. Whenever we do an assessment, especially in the younger grades, but even in the older, we just want to have a check-in about what how it's going, and then what maybe we need to shift our teaching. Because really every year, there may be a class that needs more work in one targeted area versus another. So we want to be nimble enough so that we can adjust accordingly, but still stay true to what the overarching arc of the curriculum is. So it's a little bit of a dance that we do. Yeah. The last thing is a big sneak preview of something. The last item on here, it says calendar next year. So this year, and based on feedback we've been collecting over the last year or so, we're feeling like waiting until January to have parent-teacher conferences and progress reports and all is a long time. And I think that can contribute to some of the anxiety, if you will, around like, how is my child doing? And so next year, because schools are seasonal, we can't quite pivot to doing it this year, but we are going to go to a model where we're going to have a parent-teacher conference in October. And then there'll still be a progress report in January, but there won't be a conference. And then we'll have another conference in the spring, like in March or April. And that calendar is going to be sent out to you all a little bit later today. That's why I felt like I could share it with you. But together with all the other vacations and all that. So you can get that school calendar and you can make your plans for next year. But while we're working through this year, where it feels like we've got a lot of information we can't wait to share with you, I think there's also this family series of education programs that we are hoping will help address some of the things that are on your mind, and those are coming up. We'll have one almost every month from here through the rest of the year. So there'll be a lot more opportunities for us to talk together like this. So I think we'll dive in. I think just as we've been doing, I think we can continue to just kind of If you have a question, raise your hand and we'll go that way. And then we'll also set aside some time at the end for any other lingering questions if we didn't address them. So the first main area that of the curriculum that we're going to touch on is literacy. And literacy is not just reading, but it's reading, writing, speaking. It also involves library. We have a fabulous librarian, as you all know, and a lot of the thinking and extension work that happens with our literacy program happens in collaboration with Ms. Noth. I mean, there's just wonderful things that happen there too, so I don't want to take that away. What I want to do is just kind of walk through these 3 different grade bands, the ELC, K through 2, and 3 through 5, and talk a little bit about what we focus on in school, and then how, optionally, if you want to work at home on something, here are some ideas for you related to that. And it was a challenge for me as I was going through this, actually, to think about, can I capture in a phrase or a few words what literacy should be about in each of these grade spans? And so, so I tried to do that. It was one of those kind of interesting exercises. In the ELC, I feel like our job is to help connect the wonder that they have in the world to print, to the existence of print. We really have the opportunity to help them understand basic story structure. There's a lot of wonder that they have about nonfiction related things like the ocean or animals or whatever, and just those wow facts, just being able to connect those to, if you're excited about that, there's actually, here's a word, here's a way that you can capture that excitement. And because they're at a stage developmentally where so much is happening with their bodies physically and with their senses, we also want to help them start to translate that into language. And we do that by noticing, naming, and comparing. But I think that, again, there could be some feelings out there. I don't know how you all are feeling, but that there needs to be formal reading instruction during these years, and that doesn't actually resonate with us. There may be children who are reading, who have figured out the code of language, and that is so okay, but we still want to make sure that we connect the wonder that they have with the world and the curiosity to print. I don't know if you had any comments on that. Does that?
I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
I definitely didn't have a reader in the ELC.
Yeah.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think that
Can I just say one thing?
Oh, sure, of course.
I think here's just one perspective as sort of one of the older people in the room. And this is, I would say, sort of true across the board through the next 3 sections. It often feels like there's such a wide spectrum in, excuse me, ELC kindergarten through sort of 3rd grade. And I was chatting with my son, Harry, who's a 7th grader, after our conversation the other day about kind of how he felt once he got into middle school. Was he prepared? And there were some areas where he was like, yeah, like in this one area, I felt like I, wasn't like at the top, I wasn't in the advanced class. But he's like, but now I can't even remember that. Like it all sort of averages out. Not that everybody ends up in the same place, but you end up like what feels like, oh my gosh, my kid is so far behind in reading, or my kid is so far behind in math when they're in kindergarten or 3rd grade. I would say by 5th grade, it starts to kind of all come together, and eventually they kind of all get to the same place. They just may get there at different times. Yeah. So that's one thing that I sort of found as a way to ease some anxiety for me. It was like, yeah, they're not my kid didn't read until whenever, but like he eventually got there. And now like they're all reading the same books. It doesn't matter if they started reading it in the ELC or midway or end of kindergarten. They're kind of, by 5th grade, they're all reading the same thing, and it doesn't really matter as much. That's my take.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And I've also noticed, I've been here long enough that I've had siblings So it's often the older child
Yes.
may be very different from a younger child in the same family, and that in and of itself, if you have 2 children or 3 children, can really cause some concern. You're like, oh my gosh, this is so different than, yeah. Or I have a cousin, who's the same age as my son or daughter, and they're like doing way more or different or something. So all those comparison things that happen are natural, but I think that it's, I guess we're trying to say we want to partner with you so that if there is something that we might need to address in terms of a challenge, a potential learning difference, that we're all feeling partnered together, but that there is such a range in these early years that it's natural.
But it really is true that the kids all, because I remember being in 1st and 2nd grade and thinking, oh my gosh, some kids are reading chapter books, and my kids just starting to read our storybooks at home with 1 line on it. And I think some of the kids that read earlier later had to work on comprehension. So they might be able to read through the whole book, but the comprehension piece wasn't there, versus the kids that were slower actually got that comprehension piece because it took them so much longer to learn that. And it is true, in 5th grade, they're all reading the same books. Like I never thought that they would all be on that same level, and they really are. And so I think sometimes it's a little bit of patience. Of course, it's different when there's learning differences, but overall, like, that is what we've experienced, the same thing you've seen. And so just that confidence that they're going to get there.
Yeah.
And they all have to.
Yep. Sarah?
Yeah, I have a question about, I believe, and I think it's great also that the kids are being taught and, trying to talk about everybody that shares different pieces, and we have a lot of conversations about that. What I'm curious about is the school's opinion. I know when Kendall was in ELC, she was very interested in reading, and it felt like I was off searching on my own. How do I support this? Because it's not, the focus in school. That is totally fine with me, but I think it would be helpful to have some, support systems or systems in place that you could use. Like we ended up using the Bob series, and we used it, as she expressed interest. We didn't push it, but like when she wanted to, we did it. Was the Bob series a great resource? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just something that, because I'm not a teacher, I could actually follow.
Yeah.
Right? And so, I think it's great that everybody gets places at different times, but when kids with less of interest, it'd be nice as the parent to be able to dig a little deeper into that if they want to.
I agree with you. I don't know if you could hear Sarah. She was talking about having a daughter who was very interested in reading early, and so then having resources available. Yeah. And I think the other thing I heard you say, I'm not sure if the Bob series was great. You know what? If she was interested in it and it was motivating for her, like, go for it. Don't also worry about, like, doing the wrong thing. Yeah, because it's great. If she was interested in it and it encouraged her to keep going, it's all good. That's part of it, too. I think I know that sometimes there's a worry about doing the wrong thing. Stay in communication with your teachers and with us, but don't worry about that, too, because they're incredibly resilient and curious and all, so I'm sure it's worthwhile. In the grade span of the kindergarten through 2nd grade, one of the things that we really focus on is making sure that we build a strong foundation through decoding instruction and strategy instruction for reading. And so we want to kind of take you off the hook there for having to do that at home, because that can be really painful, and it's not necessarily the best thing to add into your parent-child relationship. But if you feel like you want to do something, just ask us, and we'll partner with you on what might be appropriate to do there. I don't know, Leah, if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, kind of like going off what you were saying, I feel like parents sometimes have a worry of like, I'm not a teacher, I don't know how to teach it, like, but a lot with reading, exposure and time spent is really important. So, I mean, yes, like Leslie's saying, we'll do the nitty gritty if there's some reading challenges, like that's why, we are there to pull them and we'll meet with you about that if that's a concern. But in general, time spent reading is really, and that could be reading out loud. A lot of times parents think like that is not as important, you know, like we need to get them reading on their own, but listening to stories and talking about comprehension and what happened and the characters, those are all great skills to keep working on. And then having them sometimes, you know, reading back and forth, sharing the time. But again, also the flip of that is like if they're not into it, not to push too much, you know, because that can really backfire, especially if it is someone who's having some challenges. They can lose some confidence, and then reading becomes more of a struggle because they really don't want to, because it feels like this is really hard.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, Chuck.
We were talking about, Ben was making comments about teaching how our kids are learning math, the blocks and things. The same applies to reading. I noticed a difference where Maxton came home, he was chunking words, and he was breaking things down, and I was very familiar with the tools that were used in the classroom when reading with our children. Carson has had a completely different experience. He just came home and started reading. I'm not sure where he learned because it was a completely different process.
Right. He's just so much smarter than me.
Clearly.
So with Carson, he's reading to me now, and I'm kind of falling back into my old habits of if he doesn't pronounce a word, pronouncing it for him. When with Maxton, I was much more rigorous with what I think you're describing as decoding instruction.
Yeah.
And so it's important to continue to teach the parents those tools because we'll work against the teachers at home.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. No, that's a really good point. Yeah. Yes.
Decoding the way you look at it.
The way I look at it is that decoding is helping children wherever they are make sure that they have really strong letter sound association, they have word attack strategies, they can build and decompose words, and that when they get to unfamiliar words, they're able to decode them. Part of that whole umbrella also means there are some irregular sight words and things that have to be memorized, so that's a piece of it too. There's a memorization piece. Yeah. Yes.
So do you recommend it's not helping them with the word or like pronouncing it correctly?
Yeah, it depends. And Leah, you can pipe in too. It depends a little bit. If it's a word that's decodable, I would say you could actually prompt them and say, what sound does that make? And kind of like, rather than you say it for them. If they're really excited to read this book that's kind of high above their level, but it's very motivating for them. It might be a nonfiction book about cheetahs or something, and it has the word humongous in it. That would be an example where I might say, oh, this is a really interesting word, humongous. And I might say that and then have them repeat it after me or something like that. So it's a little case dependent, but.
Yeah, and I would say, if there's too many hard words, then probably it's not a just right. I would say the only books I would really be worrying about helping them with are ones that they can mostly do by themselves, and there's not that many hard words, and then you could help them because they're right at that baseline, they're almost getting it themselves. And if it starts to feel like there's a lot of hard words you're helping with, then I would just switch and you read that book, or or let them make the mistakes and not worry about it. But I wouldn't put a pressure at home to be reading books that are not at the just right level. Really, they should mostly be reading books to you that they feel confident in, and maybe struggle with a couple words here and there, but they're kind of doing fine on. And save the other stuff for, at school we can tackle those other things.
Right. And I think on the in the upper grade span, I'm just noticing the times. I'm going to kind of pick up my pace a little bit. In the upper grade span, it's so much about comprehension and having evidence for your thoughts and opinions around text, understanding characters really deeply, and then also exploring why an author may have made the choices that they did around a book. So it's really, it gets to a metacognitive area where, I'm an author, and this author also made some choices, and why did they make those choices, and what does that say about them, and how can I interact with that? And so it's a whole another level of comprehension. So That's really what I think about in the 3rd through 5th grade. And you'll notice in that curriculum, the reading and writing time starts to blend much more so than it does in the younger grades, where there might be a designated reader's workshop and then a designated writer's workshop. In 3rd through 5th, often they have their reading and writing in the same area. So they're learning from authors, kind of marinating in that kind of genre, and then themselves creating that and writing that. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts about that last piece, the reading? Anything you wanted to add to that for the upper grades? Anything for upper grades on the reading or writing side?
I think it really just comes back to that idea of just being comfortable discussing reading and discussing stories and writing and how everything is connected. And at the end of the day, sometimes the most important thing you can do is just really have a conversation about some of the more interesting pieces of this. Well, the author said this, but what does that mean? And really having them think about text as a full picture instead of just each line as individual pieces.
And I think one of the most powerful things that you can do is model reading in whatever way that works for you, whether it's a Kindle, something just, and stopping and thinking out loud is incredibly powerful. Just saying, oh my gosh, I just read this really interesting thing. And just like showing that you're stopping to think about something is really powerful, because children, even in our upper grades, sometimes consume books almost like it's like a race to get to the end, and then they really need to be reminded and encouraged to dig in and really savor all that's there, because there's often so much there to think about.
Yeah, one thing I found that, because I have a couple kids who tear through books like that, is just to get them to retell the story to me. Be like, what happened? What is this book? What is this all about? Tell me the story. And they will often get really into it, and then they'll talk forever about, and then this happened, and I'm like, okay, summary. But it is a nice way to get them to do a little bit of that like reflection and connection.
Right. Yes, Melanie.
The log.
Initials, and he wants to turn in and get a sticker, and it ends up causing more stress than I think it's worth. There's some flexibility in only doing the read log 3 days out of the week, or assume you'll read every day anyway.
Right. I think we really want homework to feel like it reinforces and contributes overall, not every night, because I know some nights are, things are going on, but that it's not adding to the stress, So that's a great point. I can certainly bring that back to the team, and we can follow up with that too, to see if there's a way that we could, you're not worried about it, but the actual process is causing a little bit of stress, it sounds like. And I think that one of the things that we try to have infused throughout everything is a little practice with executive function skills, but of being accountable for your belongings and all that, and bringing that back to school. But if it's feeling like that's too much, overwhelming, that can again backfire. So, Sarah, one more thing, and then we're going to move on to math. Yep. Sure. Okay, thank you. I'm not originally the kind of the intent, but we can check on that too. See if there's some flexibility with that. Okay, let's hop into math, and because I know this is an area with where there's a lot of information out there, and a lot more coming. And then in terms of school. With math, what we hope to do is connect, again, natural curiosity to number sense in the ELC. You've if you've been over there, you know that they're always compiling data, counting, sorting. We really hope that perhaps they're able to count 1 to 1 up to about 10 in the ELC, but that doesn't always happen. But it's something that they're really on. When they get to kindergarten and kindergarten through 2nd grade, if I have to think about what we really focus on is as much of a foundation on place value as we can. If we can get a really strong foundation and understanding of addition and subtraction within 20 so that they understand the relationship between addition and subtraction, but also really understand when something goes from the ones place to the tens place to the hundreds place. If they can really understand how that value piece, that's huge. We're going from concrete to abstract in that time frame, and that can really give them such a great foundation for what they do in the upper grades, where our emphasis is on tenacity with problem solving and being able to solve problems really flexibly and confidently in a lot of different ways, using all 4 operations, and knowing what would be an efficient strategy and what's not an efficient strategy. They may have their favorite couple of go-to strategies, and we want to have them have a broad understanding of how to solve problems. And I think that in terms of home activities, and I'll have the folks talk to this a little bit, we encourage game-based activities, fun activities, connecting math to whatever is going on in your life. If you're skiers, if there's a way you can bring math into it, those kinds of things are so helpful for children to generalize and really understand how math applies to the world around them. We also would say if there's a particular unit that your child seems to be struggling with or really loving and wants extension with, check in with your teacher, because we do have extra copies of the math kind of workplaces that you could bring home and either practice for a little bit of extra practice or extend for some interesting enriched thinking. In 1st grade, I wanted to share with you, Michael Shin did something really creative. He noticed a handful of his children were having a challenge around place value, and so he bought a bunch of Fitbits, and different kids are wearing the Fitbits and really noticing their how many steps it takes for them to get to their special classes, the library, and then using some of those numbers in some problem solving, some calendar work and all. And it's really helped a lot of children who were just not, the idea of ones and tens and hundreds was just not sticking with them. And so they had a physical way that they actually began to understand that. So be creative and think about it in a fun way. They're also, based on feedback from a lot of parents and from what we've learned through the years, we are adding in a little more computational fluency practice into our math program compared to what we had in the past. That was a piece that felt like it was missing. That might also be a home opportunity there to practice multiplication tables or things like that at home. Not for a lot of the time and not having that be the emphasis, but making sure that not knowing that 7 times 8 is 56 pretty quickly doesn't stop you from being able to solve a really cool multi-step problem, right? So we don't want you to get stuck at the first step. So there's been a little bit of a shift, I think, in our philosophy and program around that, staying true to how we approach math, but also incorporating that, bringing that in, I think, to really have a better, prepare our students in a little bit better way. So I'm going to turn it over to the panel. I feel like I want you all to talk about that, either from a parent perspective or from a teaching perspective.
Yeah, I can jump in first. I think so much of what we do in math is just around, again, the kind of number fluency and seeing the connections between numbers, and that's the kind of stuff that can be really easily worked with at home, because it can just be conversations throughout the day or in the evening, just looking for chances to solve problems, or obviously think up problems and then solve them around numbers at home. So whether that's just like as you're unpacking groceries, trying to figure out what fractions of your groceries are made up of this, or looking at the money that goes into a bill and things like that, where you're just trying to build in those numbers to the everyday life, so that I really don't think that we see students just saying like, I hate math, the way they did 20 years ago or something like that. And I think part of that is that we're trying to just have math be part of life. It's not this weird subject that they dive into every once in a while, but it's just part of what we do, and we work through those things. Like when I go home, I work on my math just by looking at this or looking at that, and having that be part of life and just a more fluid conversation.
Anything about math at home? I mean, I think you have a grad now, so I think that computational fluency piece was something that was so helpful to hear from you and other families too.
That was the one point I made with Leslie the other day was I think we have felt in general very positively towards the foundation that our kids have gotten in math at PBS. I do think that the one area that we felt like was amiss was frankly multiplication tables. Like, just as she said, like, that's just one of those are facts you kind of need to know, and the grouping and the friendly numbers and all that stuff works awesomely. And I see the way that even my third grader does math, I think makes a lot more sense and is faster in many ways than the way I learned it and trying to like carry numbers in my head. But multiplication tables are the one area, so I'm so happy to hear that there's more support for that. But I do think math was the point where, as I mentioned in the beginning, that when I was talking with Harry, I think he was like, I felt like math was an area where I wasn't like at the top of my class when I got to sixth grade, but I don't even notice it anymore. So that is the kind of thing, like there are sort of strategies. I think a lot of the strategies that they learn around math and the comfort level they get here at PBS is a great foundation. And then some of the specific things that they learn, with algebra or whatever in sixth grade, they kind of all catch up to the same place pretty quickly.
And my big thing in our conversation was, I want to know when to do this. Like, is it after you've taught everything at school, and then they send, okay, your second grader by December should be able to know be able to add up to 20. So if my own child is not there, then I know, okay, I'm following the curriculum. Like, they have learned this in the classroom, but this is when I need to practice with my child. And I think those kind of check-ins, or at the end of fourth grade, they need to have their times table memorized. So that summer, if my child's not there, then I have a concrete way to work with them on that. And I think that's where I need the teachers to partner with, because I said, when Josh was in third grade, a lot of us were like, wait, they're learning times table. We don't understand how they're learning it, but shouldn't we just have them learn it?
Yeah.
But then we believe in the philosophy, but should we teach them? Should we not teach them? And if we just had an answer to that as parents, that would be, I think, the best way for us to all feel more confident about it.
And just one thing to add to that, from our conversation in preparation for this, I do think that there's an opportunity, and I don't know if it's through these series or I think ideally through a broader based communication, to educate parents on the thoughtfulness and sort of deliberate nature of the instruction. And this is the reason that we're starting with arrays in third grade is because it lays this foundation for this, whatever, and then that's going to scaffold up to, and the way that you watch your kid do math in second grade and third grade is kind of painful, because you're like, oh my God, you draw those little circles, and then you circle those, and you draw these circles, and you circle those, and then you add, and you're like, oh my God, there's a better way, I swear. And like, I have to hold myself back, right? It's like, just put the numbers on top of each other and add them, and you'll get, Yeah. But I think, I know that you do that. There's intention behind the way that you instruct, and I think it does really set them up to be better mathematicians than certainly I was.
Agreed.
But I think that we don't all know that. Like, we don't know. So I think whether it's math or reading, understanding there's deliberate curriculum, it's scaffolds in this way, it may not necessarily make sense to you if you didn't grow up through this sort of educational system, which we didn't. But here's how it, like, at the end of the day, by 5th grade, they're going to know how to do this, and they'll be efficient mathematicians. They won't be drawing pictures and circling them with arrows and stuff. But I think there's an opportunity there. I think for me, even having been here for so long, to understand that better, and I think that would help me and other parents have that sort of faith in, like, I know my kid's going to get there, and I understand what you're doing actually has real intention behind it and thoughtfulness.
Thank you. I agree. Yes. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Les. Just building on this point that Lara's making around kind of the explanation on how these things kind of stack up to each other. I wonder if there's an opportunity to explain some of the outcomes, whether it's, from our alumni that are going into middle school. And where was it, for example, that your son saw those gaps?
Yeah.
We have so many alumni going into so many different schools that there may be an opportunity to kind of calculate that, share that with parents, and then be able to say, okay, this is something we recognize that these are the actions that we're taking in this case. Some of the more computational stuff that we talked about.
Right.
Or maybe if there's something in the standardized tests where there's something where there's a gap or whatever.
Yeah.
How are we evolving the curriculum based on the outcomes?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think that many of you know that we do these curriculum deep dives on each subject every 3 years, but I feel like with math, we've had our second deep dive this past summer, but we actually are kind of always doing like little mini deep dives, if that makes sense, throughout the school year. And so we don't want that, we don't want to ever close off what you're talking about, Joe, that loop of like, okay, we can always, there's going to be a gap somewhere, and let's make sure that we're on it and aware of it, so, yeah. Yes?
I think I have two questions.
Yes.
I don't know what maybe more a focus thing versus here. But so one question: how do you accommodate the child in teaching? Let me give you an example. Ramya loves dance and music and painting and stuff. So I said, "Can you draw a perfect circle?" So she drew she always teaches me dance and drawing. So I said, "Okay, can you help me draw a perfect circle?" And she drew 2 or 3. Then I took a piece of thread, took a pencil, and drew a circle. I said, "What do you think? Which is more perfect?" So my question, my attempt was really to understand what does she like and how does she internalize concepts in the context of what she likes, which may be more arts rather than STEM.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of curious about how much the style of teaching you have, because much of this seems to be doing arithmetic, and I'm sort of thinking of more abstract concepts from the world around us.
Yeah.
That's one question I have. And on the second part, so this is what I think of more deeper, more fundamental training. The other part of what I think of as a vocational, right? I don't really keep track of what you teach in numbers and so on. So is it important that we keep track of all these details and work with children on that? Or because the issue is also, in the vocational part of it is they need to learn concepts of numbers or whatever it is, but also the vocational part of it is outcomes, matching something, getting to the next school. That seems very, I mean, you need to do it, but it's a mechanistic getting in system that is so fundamental.
Yep. Thank you. I'm noticing that some people are needing to leave because we have come through to our 9:30, so I'm just cognizant of that. Thank you for coming. And we also are losing one of our panel members. That's okay. Yeah, thank you. But I think I can speak to that a little bit, but then also specifically, it sounds like we could get together and share a little bit more offline too. But I think that your children have a huge variety of experiences every day where their particular passions, learning styles, are honored and used in a way to help them perhaps explore parts of the curriculum that they love and maybe some parts that they're more resistant to. Because we love to think of what we do as being strengths-based. So if someone's really motivated or interested in one particular way of learning or one particular subject, we often try to use that to help them engage with other things that we think are part of being a well-balanced student at that age level. And so, for example, Ms. Armashevitz is constantly integrating other science and math into art instruction, constantly. It's fabulous. So I think that that integration can't always be captured because there are moments of those things happening between a teacher and a student, but that's a huge part of why our faculty is so outstanding and talented, is that they have, with the way that we approach curriculum, they do have the ability to get to know the children and get to know who they are as learners in that way. So I think that's kind of answered it. But, yeah.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to stop.
I know, you too. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I think, so thank you all. I think the last piece that we were going to talk about was social emotional. And I think that that's something that's integrated throughout a lot of what we do. I can stay for about another 5 or 10 minutes if you all want to do that, but please feel free if you need to leave also to do that. So, great. So the emotional intelligence and social emotional growth is not a specific isolated topic, because it comes into almost everything that we do every moment of the day here at PBS. As you know, we do have Dr. Reha, who pushes into the classrooms and teaches specific social emotional competencies or skills as part of our curriculum once a rotation. But I think that what I'm talking about here is a little bit of what Lara was talking about in terms of the intentionality. With the big picture, what we try to do as children come into our school in the Early Learning Center is help them navigate the tension between being this beautiful, young, unique individual who's very egocentric and learning that they are part of a community, but also at the same time honoring who they are as they're growing. We're in that area, almost everything that we're doing is social. We're trying to help them develop their ability to use words versus their physical nature. That's a big emphasis there, and some early conflict resolution, a lot of role plays, puppet shows, things to work things out. It's a big part of the day there. But I think what's also wonderful about that age is that once they have some language and once they see how successful some of those early conflict resolution strategies can be, they're very open to trying them and very open to having and valuing different kinds of friends. I think that what we notice as children go into the next phase of the K through 2 is that friendships start to become more complex, and really understanding the relationship between themselves and their actions and the impact on others starts to be really important. And learning how to take some responsibility for your actions is a big piece of that K through 2 band. It's not always something that they want to do, or even, children are always exploring and doing things, and they are bound to have some missteps along the way. So I think that what we try to do is help them reflect on things that happen, because there are going to be things that happen, and then start to develop some tools for self-awareness and self-regulation. Annette, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to share about because your kiddos have gone through those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, I guess the thing is my kids are all so different, and so I feel like they've all kind of, maybe I need a minute to think about all the 3
it's all good.
kids.
Yeah, no, it's all good. I'll just keep going on to the upper grade, and then feel free to add in. In 3rd through 5th grade, things get even more complex. I think that it's not just with the social relationships, but it's also within their academics. They need to learn how to work together, and also learn how to be both a leader and a listener, and that can be really challenging for children. I think that Dr. Reha introduces some more complex tools to the kids in those grades. There's something called a drama triangle that she introduces where, if someone's a victim, someone's a persecutor, and someone's the bystander. And she uses that model to help people understand how you can start to play a role in relationships. It actually was interesting. I think sometimes the adults learn things from these two. Trust cup, where you learn how the more someone can trust you in a relationship, the more fun and the more opportunities you have. And then if that trust cup, something compromises that, your trust cup can feel empty, and therefore that's not as much fun and as interesting if things go wrong. So really interesting tools. Positive self-talk is a big part of this 3rd through 5th grade. A lot of children get much more internal and have some really sophisticated and complex interactions that they're thinking in their mind. And I think as a school, we try to focus on helping them find a healthy outlet for some of those complex internal feelings. They start to do maybe a little bit more comparison between themselves and their peers academically. There's also friendships, your value as someone who may be the same or different from some of your friends, that can really take a toll on the children. So we notice that for some children, for example, a journal, that they might take some time during recess rather than play sports. They write or draw in their journal. Maybe they have lunch with a teacher or two. So there are lots of different tools and strategies we try to use to support these children through what can be kind of a complex time too. Anything?
I've taken some time to think about my 3 different kids.
Yeah.
I guess I'll start with my oldest one, who generally has a very good idea of who he is and what he believes. So he hasn't had to deal with problems with friendships or self-doubt or any of that. But we've seen him also help his sister, who is the exact opposite, has always been very tough on herself. And I've seen the school help her with that from very early on. She was very tough on herself for making mistakes when she was learning how to write letters and would get extremely frustrated. But her teachers every day would reinforce the fact that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to do this. It's okay to do that. And I've seen her transition completely, and that has been amazing. And now I'm watching the 2 of them help their younger sister navigate kindergarten, because her struggle is a little bit different. It's more social and making friends and connections. And it's funny because now I'm really seeing the curriculum at play, because they're bringing in all the language that their teachers use, that Sarah Reha uses, and it's neat to see all of them transform in that way and how it actually does help them. And with Joshua, my oldest one, who has that strong sense, sometimes it's about taking a step back and asking somebody else how they feel, because he himself knows how he feels. He deals with pressures and all that, okay, but he will go ask a friend at recess, or he'll notice, like he mentioned that he brought this story up about after the ERBs, no one was talking at recess. Like it was kind of this quiet zone, and he's like, how can I, because he doesn't stress about things like exams, he's like, how can I lighten this mood? So he started telling these crazy funny jokes that made absolutely no sense, and then everyone started laughing, and they got back to where they used to be. So I think it's helped him in that way in trying to sympathize and empathize with other people. So I've seen that really help and transform, I think, at PBS, also with the addition of Sarah. And so that's how I see it in my own children.
Yeah, thank you. Just home partnership language. I think that something that is helpful is we try to provide as many opportunities as we can for children to process a conflict or things during the school day, if it's at all possible. It's not always possible for a variety of reasons. So it is helpful if you hear something that comes up at school, to have a kind of as much of a neutral reaction as possible. I know you're a human being, and so I'm not, again, please, I don't want to feel like I'm telling you how you need to talk with your children, but sometimes they might need to vent a little bit about something that was upsetting to them, but they actually may not want you to take any action. It might just be something they need to tell you, and so I'm sharing that only in the sense that sometimes when things come back to school and feel super urgent, then we're on that, and then sometimes things can get perhaps magnified, or maybe it gets difficult to figure out exactly what happened, and so again, it's helpful. It's not always possible. We do try to process things as much as possible during the school day, if it's at all possible, and just asking open-ended questions about perhaps what was your child's part in a conflict, or things like that can be super helpful too. So I think I'm going to stop there and see if there are any last questions, and then try to wrap up it within 2 hours. Thank you for staying within 2 minutes. Thank you for staying a little bit later. And do you have a question? Yeah.
First of all, I'm pretty impressed with PBS, just when I see, the way she's been developing, right, language, just help people.
Yeah.
But I guess my question is, are there any tips, and maybe again offline, on differentiating? Children have got their perspective, which may or may not be quite what's going on in the way they're developing, and they have imagination, and sometimes very strong feelings, right? So how do you, any tips on how to sort through that, you process what they're telling you?
Yeah, I think that something that I do as an educator, and something I would imagine might happen in your role as a family member, is a feeling like you need to solve the problem instantly. And so I feel like maybe a curious question restating what, it sounds like you feel really strongly about that. And then kind of, you want to tell me a little bit more about that? Rather than say, because I know that sometimes when I'm doing some conflict resolution here in my office, which it doesn't happen all that often, but I tend to want to solve that problem right away and say, oh my gosh, let me figure out what to do. But sometimes it's really just saying you have a strong feeling you feel strongly about that, and leave it at that.
I don't know if this is right because I'm not an educator, but I do try to ask my kids to tell me the story from the other person's perspective, with their words. And a lot of the times, as they're doing that, they realize themselves that they have only seen the situation from one side. And also to stay kind of neutral, even though they're so mad, oh, this person didn't want to play with me, and all this stuff. And sometimes when they start to retell that story from, how did the other kids see that? You came up, but they were already playing something. That helps them kind of process it. I think the younger kids, I'm more referring to my kindergartner, and that really helps her and me to get a better sense of what really happened, just to put themselves in someone else's shoes. I don't know if that's correct.
Yes, that's all good.
Yeah,
no, it's good. Thank you. Well, I know there's probably more to talk about, but I'm going to wrap it up here, and I would welcome your feedback either individually, or if you want to set up time to talk more, anything on your mind, or if you have any feedback about today's session, and if it would be helpful to have more information about any particular area here. Keeping in mind that there's lots coming your way with progress reports and parent-teacher conferences and curriculum guide, and all coming your way. But be happy to follow up with you on anything that's on your mind. Thank you. Okay. Yep.
Thanks.
Take care. Thanks. Thanks for sticking out an extra time. Chairs or
I can't even figure out. Oh, of course. Sorry. I think it's really great, though. I mean, people were really. I'm not sure how to turn this off. Mine's not turning off. So